Light up your fire.
So yeah, last time we looked at the moment when making a point turns into explaining yourself during high stakes moments. Today, we go a little further into that same territory. But first, to recap, we said that making a point comes as a complete forward gesture. And so your exhale carries the whole sentence without bracing for any pushback. You're not expecting any criticism. Explaining yourself feels different. It's closer to a preemptive defense, dressed up as speech, really, if you think of it. So your nervous system braces for a challenge that hasn't actually arrived because somewhere underneath there's a flicker of doubt. And that bracing in your body usually tends to manifest as a breath hold, as if you're unconsciously interrupting your inhale, which is what happens when the body is preparing to react. Now, let's go a layer deeper into the architecture underneath all this and look at how pressure moves from the body into language and why language is where we tend to see it first, to notice it first. Most people assume that pressure shows up as language first, and that belief alone is enough to keep you disconnected from your body. When it actually all starts with a breath hesitation, and that breath hesitation is so subtle that it's unconscious. You rarely notice it as it's happening. So the body gets triggered first, then the mind follows, and then language adjusts last. And for multilingual speakers, this sequence should be easier to notice because we're already familiar with that subtle somatic recalibration that needs to happen in a nervous system every time we move from one language into another. And that's a great skill to have. But unfortunately, it tends to go unacknowledged because it's often automatic and quite difficult to name most of the time. But under pressure in high stakes moments, that same skill is often mistaken for something else. Instead of recognizing that as a nervous system, your nervous system is doing its familiar work. You know, most people read it as a lack of fluency and blame themselves for it instead of actually seeing that your body is flagging something to you. And again, we're not going to fix anything yet, as usual. The key is to first recognize the order of events. And yes, in the early stages of the Lingosomatica method, most of the work is observational because we are training ourselves to live more in our bodies after being so accustomed to live in our heads all the time. So body first, then attention, and then language, not the other way around. And once you see that sequence, you stop blaming your lack of fluency, and then automatically you stop focusing on performance. Because breath is where it all becomes visible and evident. And if you pause it right there, it will reveal it to you. That's because that is the point where the physical and the essential meet. And by essential, I mean consciousness, your awareness. And that's why in the breath, it's where your physical voice, the vocal cord, and your authorial voice meet. And that's where your connection, you make the connection in your consciousness. And that moment feels almost alien to you because, as I said, you're not used to be present in it. And that's where you want to stay. And together with that, the other thing that you need is the willingness to be seen as imperfect and not yet resolved, even in high stakes moments. I know that in these situations, staying present with another person when it matters a lot while you speak is its own skill. And there's a lot of pressure to perform. Here, however, we're just starting to explore where your relationship with yourself as a speaker begins and how. So the willingness to be seen in your linguistic limitations is crucial here, even when fluency bias is at play. I don't mean to suggest that the threat isn't real. In fact, I spoke about it in an earlier video, and the link is below if you haven't seen it. But sovereignty means that you stay seen anyway, instead of performing your way around it. That posture is a game changer. Let me explain. I once worked with a client from a major tech company who was fluent enough to hold his own and make himself understood when it mattered at work. So language was never really his true ceiling. What held him back was the struggle that he had with freeing himself from the pressure to perform in a highly competitive environment, and being seen as competitive mattered enormously to him, and quite rightly so. It's understandable. But that meant that he froze every time he had to speak without preparation. And so spontaneity felt almost dangerous. And that's a big flag from your subconscious. And it happens to all of us because we all have something trapped in our subconscious. And his attention, unfortunately, stay fixed on the language itself far more than on his breath or even the simple bravery the moment actually required. So although he wasn't super fluent yet, his real issue was that he hadn't yet given himself permission to be seen struggling with language, with fluency. And that alone kept him stuck for longer than it needed to. And this challenge often comes up with my clients. Speaking with ease on the fly in a second language is the hardest part for almost everyone, of course. And the answer isn't learning more language. It lives at the somatic level. It's in how willing you are to be seen while you find your way through a sentence. It's not easy, but you have to learn not to care, basically. And you'd be surprised how little it takes to actually move past that. And there's a simple practice I often suggest. Let the sentence stay imperfect sometimes. For example, when speaking with your colleagues during routine meetings where you can be a bit more intimate and you're used to that presence. Trust the room to meet you halfway instead of trying to be perfect before you even open your mouth. You'll be surprised how people stay more engaged with this way because you're inviting them into the sentence with you. And those small and remarkable moments happen throughout most days in the workplace if you look for them. So this pattern of body, attention, and language doesn't expect your perfect English from you. It asks you to be willing to be witnessed while you use it. So what's actually operating beneath all this is just an old pattern built around wanting to stay legitimate and remain in control to avoid losing credibility, which is understandable. And patterns like these formed early in life through repeated experiences that taught the nervous system its own particular mapping, which is unique to each of us. And that mapping is what keeps the pattern running on its own and reinforcing in the background, especially in high stakes moments. And so there's another pattern emerging. Meaning becomes pattern, and pattern becomes posture. And then the posture becomes voice and structure. And when you see that second pattern, you start noticing what's organizing you while you speak. So what do you actually do in those moments? There are two scenarios that are worth knowing. The first one is when you catch it before it happens, and you probably feel the bracing arrive in your body. Things like the inhale gets interrupted or slight tightening of the throat. And so that's the moment when if you feel it just coming, that's the moment to pause and take a breath deliberately. And you're not planning your next sentence in that moment, though. You're just breathing to reconnect with your body, and then you let the exhale lead. That's a subtle change in paradigm, liberating. And you'd be surprised what comes after that, because you've interrupted a pattern, and what comes afterwards is just new. The second and more common scenario is when you don't catch it in time and you're already explaining away, justifying, and you notice it mid-sentence. That's a bit tougher to deal with, but the first thing to do is to realize that that's not failure. It's just your body telling you something. It's data for you to work with. So don't rewind mid-sentence trying to reach back and fix what you've already said, because that's, first of all, is just another layer of managing your exposure, and it tends to make things messier. Again, here you need to interrupt the pattern first. So let the sentence finish and then take a deliberate breath as well and see what happens after that. Get the inhale and then let the exhale lead. If you let your body take charge for a moment, a paradigm shift may take place here too. The point is that you're interrupting a pattern. You don't know what comes after that because of that. So stay open to it. You may end up choosing the next sentence with purpose, complete, forward, with no defense attached, or something else entirely. The truth is to accept that these things happen and it will keep happening. It's life. You get destabilized, you wobble, and that's okay. Nobody's perfect, and nobody's listening for perfection. They're listening for what you say or do next. I've put together a free set of prompts around a simulated stressful scenario to help you catch that moment, the exact moment, and notice your own response to it. Do you rewind, or do you pause diligently, breathe, and choose the next sentence on purpose? The link is below. Given time, this lets you relax into speaking on the fly, even in high-stakes moments. And all it does is to ask you to be willing to be imperfect, in the same way that native speakers already are in their language every day. And so that way your attention starts to shift from managing your reply to staying connected to what's actually being said, instead of thinking what to say afterwards, which is, in any room, is the one thing that matters most, being present with your interlocutor. If you try out these exercises, share your findings in the comments. I'll be glad to know. For now, stay with what you noticed. I see you next time.